All right, so sticking with the NFL, we got some high-profile NFL coaching hires. One, my partner here, he happens to be a Denver Broncos fan, so he gonna let y'all know how he feel about their new head coach, former offense coordinator for the Green Bay Packers, Nathaniel Hackett. Then the Chicago Bears, they hired a new head coach. The Indianapolis Colts former defensive coordinator Matt Eberflus, and then right before we got on the show, we found out that the Giants has finalized a deal with the Buffalo Bills former offense coordinator Brian Daboll. So, with that said, Jay, this is pretty simple. Well, maybe it might be too simple for you because I want to ask you who's the best hire and why, but I don't know if it's gonna have a little biased sauce on there. But either way, you're a pretty objective guy, so I'm gonna ask you this anyway. Out of the three coaching hires that we found out about this weekend today, who's the best fit and why?
Oh well, of course that'll remain to be seen. But I am going to throw you a curveball because I'm almost biased in the other direction. I'm more hard on my squad than you know I should be. I think they did well. I think, and I'll get into Hackett in a minute. I do want to start with the most recent
What's up?
hiring before we got on there, which is Brian Daboll.
Okay.
I have to say, I find it somewhat hilarious that New York City is going to upstate New York to hire people. They hired the assistant GM. What's his name? Jim Shane or Joe Shane or whoever.
Right.
They hire him, and then they go get Brian Daboll. I feel like that's backwards almost. That y'all going to Buffalo to get y'all's people to run y'all's football team. Still better than the Jets, I guess. Still better than the Jets. The Jets won't. The Jets ain't ever gonna learn.
Yeah.
But look, I do gotta say, man, uh, this gonna be a challenge, I think, for both of them because the Giants have been just really bad recently. We know Dave Gettleman, not very impressive. I don't even know why they let the man retire. That should be one of the things like, hey, no, 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 you're fired. You can retire after that, but you're fired from here. And like Joe Judge, just not impressed. But this gonna be a challenge, man. I'm gonna tell you, um, for Brian Dable, it's gonna be a lot different than Josh Allen. Like I'm not seeing it with Daniel Jones. I don't care who come out there and coach. I don't know, man. I think they're gonna have to, and that's gonna be something right away between those two guys when they come in. And do they say like, okay, Daniel Jones, um, yeah, we didn't have enough of this. We're gonna go do something else. Now, then again, I'm gonna tell you, I don't know about the draft for quarterbacks this year, so I don't know. I think some teams that are kind of down and out as far as quarterbacks, they're going to be in between a rock and a hard place a little bit. And I think Denver is almost, I think you could argue they're in a similar situation. I think, you know what, out of these three, I would go with Eberflus, though. I didn't like what I've seen for Eberflus ever since he took over as the Indianapolis defensive coordinator. He strikes me as probably I think he's got the most experience out of all these guys. His resume go back about 30 years. Um, it's just a feel thing. You know how much I like what the Colts have been doing recently, even though they came up well short this season. But Frank Reich, Eberflus, the thing I like about Eberflus is this guy has built a really respectable defense over there, and he does it generally speaking without a lot of big names. We got Darius Leonard. They brought in DeForest Buckner, but by and large, outside of that, there's a bunch. There's just guys who, I mean, you wouldn't recognize a lot of those guys on the street. They don't have big names, but still, he puts together a real cohesive unit, and that plays well, opportunistic, gets turnovers, all that. And I think for Chicago, Chicago, and I know how you feel about the offense defensive thing, but both of these, really all three of these teams, Joe Judge being alleged wide receivers coach, special teams background. But all three of these teams are making a little bit of a pivot. Chicago just had an offensive guy, Matt Nagy, and we just know that. I mean, we watched games with Matt Nagy last year. We just could not understand what he was doing half the time. So now you are making a little bit of a pivot here. You're going the defensive route. I think for Chicago, for that city with the history of that team, a defensive guy almost feels right. It brings back, some of the best years of the Lovie Smith era that they had. And I know Mike Ditka was a tight end when he played, so he's an offensive guy or has an offensive background when the Bears won a Super Bowl. But you still Buddy Ryan was such a big part of that team with that defense with the '85 Bears. So between that city, between its history, I think defense does make sense for that city, and I think Eberflus is a that's a quality guy with an extensive resume who strikes me as a leader of men. The big thing, obviously, you have to nail the offensive coordinator because you do have a guy in his second season in Justin Fields. We saw flashes from him last year. I think he's got a lot of talent, and looking back, it's hard to understand how he fell all the way to the 11th pick, because, way before the draft or right after the college football player was like, this guy right after Trevor Lawrence. And then all of a sudden, no, he's not. But you can see the guy has a lot of talent. You got to have an offensive guy with him to harness that talent and get things going. So that's going to be a challenge for Eberflus and whoever's the GM. It ain't Ryan Pace no more. For Denver, I think they made out pretty well. I think as far as offensive guys go, I think Hackett probably has if not the best, definitely one of the best. And you look back at what he's done recently as an NFL offensive coordinator. He spent some time in Buffalo. He spent some time in Jacksonville. But
right.
you do got to give him some credit because when Blake Bortles did look somewhat like an NFL quarterback, it was under the tutelage of Nathaniel Hackett. So I think you got to give him a little bit of credit there. And then, of course, we know the last 2-3 seasons, whatever it is. I know it hasn't resulted in the winning that they probably would have liked, but Aaron Rodgers did have some of his best seasons here lately. I think this will be a second consecutive MVP award, and you do have some of those rumors percolating for Aaron Rodgers. Maybe we know how it began or the last offseason, which we didn't think Aaron Rodgers was going to play. He ended up playing, but now with the way the season ended for Green Bay, those rumors starting to circulate again. I saw a rumor where I forget the reporter's name, Jordan Schultz or whoever. He said, "Hey, Aaron Rodgers, Devontae Adams be a package deal to Denver." Hey, I'm all for it. And I said before the show, and I'll say it here: I would have hired Nathaniel Hackett, even just for the chance to go get Aaron Rodgers and Devontae Adams. Now, obviously, we're probably a long way from that happening. And regardless, even if you can't get Aaron Rodgers, he's going to have to, whoever's in there, you're going to have to figure it out, whether it's Drew Lock. Something tells me that Drew Lock still has some ability that maybe an actual offensive coordinator or offensive coach, not named Pat Shurmur, might be able to get something out of it. That's just me. That's really how I feel. That's the real celebration. Anybody but Pat Shurmur running the offense. But Denver went the opposite way. They've had Vic Fangio for the past 5 seasons. Now they've went back offense. Maybe they should have went offense after Vance Joseph. But definitely with how Denver's offense has been since Peyton Manning retired, that has to be addressed. You could bring in a competent defensive coordinator to keep this defense moving because Vic Fangio did have this defense playing great. They just never could figure out the offense. Overall, I think if you're all these 3 teams, the Giants, the Broncos, the other one, we just talking about
Giants, Broncos, and Bears.
The Bears. just spazzing out. Must be this car and all this heat in my feet. But I think But I think all 3 teams. I think all 3 teams did well. I did find it somewhat interesting that Denver had I was getting tired of it. They was putting out posts like every day, like, we have completed this interview with this guy. And it was like 10 of them. And then I think they narrowed it down to Hackett, the Rams OC under McVay, O'Connell, and then somehow Dan Quinn was the third one. I swear, if they hired Dan Quinn, I'd have lost my mind. I told you after that wild card game, like, I don't want no part of Kellen Moore or Dan Quinn after this mess. So thank God they didn't do that. And then that would have you would have really lost your mind too. Like, you went 3 straight defensive coordinators. What's wrong with you? But
Yeah,
I think all 3 of these franchises, I think they should feel good about who they hired. And but I do have to say, if I had to say, I don't know, man, because of the situation that Brian Daboll's in, I think that's going to be a project. So hopefully the Maras, they understand that and they prepare for it. And definitely they don't have the quarterback set up at all. Denver, it remains to be seen. But the good thing about Denver is that roster is set up to win. You just got to find a guy, or you just got to find a quarterback, or Hackett's got to get Drew Lock going. I think Drew Lock still has some ability. You just got to find a guy who can, harness that ability. And then Eberflus has a quarterback, I think, but they got to get more around him, and he's got to hire the right guy to run the offense.
Okay. Way to set the table. Okay, so the best situation I think is Hackett. Why do I think Hackett? Because you laid out the groundwork. Here's the deal. Not only can Hackett bring you something with the X's and O's, he can also bring you something with the personnel. Allegedly bring you something with the personnel. So take that for what it's worth. And I'm with you. If I was a Broncos fan and you told me Hackett could bring either one of them, I don't care if it could be just Devontae Adams, I'm still in. Because, yeah, you got Jared Judah. Yeah, you got Sutton. Yeah, you got – but let's keep it real here. They ain't no Devontae Adams.
I have to disagree there. It has to be Aaron Rodgers first. If it's Devontae Adams, I don't think it means much because they got receivers. It's all about the guy delivering the ball. You can have all the receivers in the world. You have to have the quarterback.
Let me tell you something. You don't have a receiver that a top-notch quarterback like Russell Wilson would like to play with that on the level of Devontae Adams. Yeah, you got Jared Judy.
Right.
Yeah, you got, but you got to understand this. Hey, the game is just you got to see the whole picture here. Because Aaron Rodgers is not the only big name you could bring in. You just talked about this lackluster quarterback draft, and I mean lackluster is keeping it light. But you telling me right now, if you had a chance to get, let's say Russell Wilson, right? Let's say Russell Wilson, he cut ties because the rumors are out there, and Aaron Rodgers goes somewhere else, and Russell Wilson like, yeah, man, I wouldn't mind going if you got an established wide receiver, because the guys you got there ain't giving me the warm and fuzzy. Oh, well, we could get Devontae Adams. Sign me up. Okay, bunch of what else, but I'm just throwing that out there.
Yes, I agree. If you bring in Devontae Adams and not Aaron Rodgers, it has to be another established quarterback that's a significant upgrade over what you have now. Yes.
Right. All right. So either way, I'm Nathaniel Hackett is my number one guy. Now number two, I like Eberflus, but like you hinted at earlier. Here's the deal, folks. I'm just not a fan of defensive coaches coming in being head coach. And listen, if it was a defensive coach he was going to hire, I'm not mad at Eberflus because I mean the proof is in the pudding. I mean, look at that Colts defense, off the charts. Look at what he did before he got to the Colts. The guy is a good coach. I'm not knocking that. Where I get the disconnect when you hire these defensive coaches is, listen, Jay, I heard Eric Magini said this. Yeah, Eric Magini said this one time on the show, and it stuck with me. He said this like 3-4 years ago. He's like, listen, man, it's only two types of coaches in the NFL. It ain't that hard. It's a coach with a quarterback and a coach without a quarterback. That's what it is. At the bottom line, that's what it is. Either your quarterback will make or break if you're a good coach or not. Because the people will tell you, hey, man, that dude coached his ass off. Oh, but they never made the playoffs. He got fired. I mean, so you can give me that, but the quarterback is what make and break. Think about this. Bill Belichick, we consider him the greatest NFL coach of all time. Most consider him, right? Mm-hmm. What did he do when he had Brian Hoyer as his starter? And what did he do when he had Cam Newton as his starter? And you know what I'm saying? So let's keep this real. He was on top of the world with Tom Brady. Then he kind of fell back in the pack, and now he got Mac Jones. But in between that time, he made it very clear. You need a quarterback. I don't care how good you are at your job. That quarterback, you need him, right? So, with that said, I just don't like that the Bears hired a defensive coordinator as a head coach with a second-year quarterback when you know you need. And listen, to your point, I might be being unfair about this because I don't know who the offensive coordinator is going to be. They might go out here and just hit a home run with the offensive coordinator and defense coordinator. But until I see that, I'm going to maintain my stance that you can't bring a defensive guy in here to get a second-year quarterback to where you need him with, as far as the progression, as far as getting better. He already struggled and flopped around with Matt Nagy all year and wondering what is this. Now you bring him you bring a new coach in here that might struggle or flop around. That's 2 years down the drain. What, the guy ain't gonna be no good until like year 4? By then, you ain't extending him and you moving on. So these early years matter. So that's why I just kind of like, a team I would have probably tried that with is the Giants rather than the Bears. Why? Because Daniel Jones, I know we ain't high on him, but he has been around for what? I think 3-4 years now. Also, if Saquon Barkley could ever stay healthy, you also got to establish running back as well. He just don't stay healthy. So if I was to I would bring in a defensive coach for that because I have 2 somewhat established players. They're not in year 2. They're not in year 1. They're established players. Now, with that said, let me wrap that up by saying, give me a reprieve to see who the coordinators is. I might, have to back that up a little bit. But as of right now, that's just how I feel until we see who they hire as coordinators, because that does matter. Now, to the third coach, Brian Daboll, here's the thing, right? I ain't mad at the hire because the guy has shown he can do some things, but he's shown he can do some things with probably a top, 3 quarterback this year? You ain't getting that with Daniel Jones, baby. You ain't getting that with him. That ain't Josh Allen out there. That ain't even Josh Allen when he was laddering the football to the referee. He ain't even that Josh Allen. So my problem here is, just like you said, he come from upstate New York. He travels on down to the G-Man, and now they like, Brian Daboll, save us. Save us. And you giving him, trash, and you want him to make treasure out of it. I think he's going to be at a very screwed up situation here. Because they're going to be like, hey, can you turn him into Josh Allen? No, I can't. Well, what can you do with him? I don't know what I could do with him because he hasn't done anything consistent other than trip himself up in the open field. That's the only thing he'd have done consistent is go for long runs, and somehow he ends up on the ground without anybody being around him. He don't throw consistent balls. He don't make consistent runs. He don't call consistent play. I don't know what he do. So he's gonna be in an unfortunate situation. And to your point, it ain't like Brian Daboll can say, well, I mean, I guess he could. He could go to this draft and say, all right, let me see who's going to fall into the second round because I definitely want to spend my first round on any of these quarterbacks. So let me see who I get in the second round. And maybe he could find a project that he could build upon. Is a guy like for instance, Malik Willis. I think Malik Willis, the quarterback out of Liberty, is a guy that he could probably draft him and kind of build upon, because I think that's probably the closest to the prototype that I see with Josh Allen as of now. And maybe he can make some things happen, but it's going to be a project. The one thing about New York is they're very impatient. They're going to want to get you out of there if you don't get them something in about 3 years. And that's with all New York teams outside of the Yankees. All of them feel that way. All of them. The Yankees, it's the only team you can kind of flop around with because they make a lot of money. Even though the Knicks make a lot of money, people just ain't got the patience there in New York. So, like I said, if I had to put it in the pecking order, I think Hackett is right now probably in the best position to succeed. And then I would take Eberflus just because of his track record is so good. It's hard to go against it. Just not a fan of defensive coaches right now, defensive head coaches. And then I take Brian Daboll coming in third because I think out of all 3 of the coaches, he has the worst situation right now. I'm sorry, but I think that's the worst situation. And so, yeah, man. But before I get out here, I gotta say, once again, we should revisit this, or maybe at least put it in a rapid or something once the coordinators are hired, because I think that will change some opinions to the left or to the right, whichever way.